Hey everybody, welcome to Freeology. Well, what the hell?
Yeah,
Freeology
Theology
Friday.
Friday, fuck it. Growing
Growing
in
in
real
real
time, Aaron and Derrick, you can call it what you want.
time. I'm your host, Aaron Tomlinson, and he is
I am Derrick Day, and Aaron, it is good to see you after,
likewise.
man, it's been like a month.
It has.
Yep,
It's
but it's good to see you. Glad you're back. And I'm excited for what we're going to talk about tonight. But before we do that, what's in your glass?
I have some Merlot tonight, going light.
Okay.
How about you?
Well, I'm going a little heavy because I'm starting off with some bullet rye,
All right.
and I'm mixing that with this jalapeno lime mixer, which
Nice.
is pretty fucking amazing.
Looks really good.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. And the next time we hook up, I'm gonna make sure we have some of this on hand.
Yeah, we need to plan that. We need to be intentional about that. So,
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
yep.
So that's what's in my glass tonight.
All right.
So
That was
what's
so
on
much
the
fun.
table?
I'm thinking about that Friday night that we did at your wedding at
Yeah,
the hotel there, and I think your brother was there, and your mom was there, and
yep.
Larry Jordan was there. I don't remember who all was there, but it was a good time.
Oh, we had a great time, and that was a great show. And having Brian on there, Brian, my brother Brian, is a very, very devout Christian.
Yeah, he is.
Um, but anyway, I thought that the two of you had a really good conversation, and it was good. And then just the whole time that you were there, that you were here, the way you melded with my family and everything, and boy, they gave you the fire baptism, but you passed with flying colors, man.
It
You're
was
like
such a
you're,
great
you're
time.
an official day, man.
It was such a great time. Little did I know I was in heart failure back then, but that would explain why I did not feel good the day of your wedding, man. I did
I know
not
you told me that.
feel good at all.
Well,
So I felt bad about that because I was not my best self for that. And I appreciated Jube, your buddy Jube, because he just we had a great time, got to know each
Yep,
other.
yep.
Great.
We had a fantastic time, and getting some people together that had not, like, getting you and Jube and Brian and me and all of us together. That was sort of like a dream come true, you know. And then my mom, God rest her soul, you got to meet her, and she embraced you and Jube as new sons, you
She
know.
sure did. She sure did. I was so disappointed that I couldn't make the trek down there for the funeral when your mom passed.
That's okay, man, because you told me, hey,
I'm, I'm
you
saying that for me, man.
yeah,
I wanted to be there. I'm saying that
I know, I
that I
know.
was disappointed. Not just. I mean, I want to be there for you as a friend too, but I don't know. Anyway, one of these days I'll be making more money.
We both will be making. We're manifesting more money.
Yes, yes,
We're
because
bringing
that's
more
really what
money.
it
We're,
boils
we're
down to. I
speaking
can
more
afford
money into the universe.
yeah, but if I'd have had the money, I'd have been there for sure.
Yep, I know you would have. I know you would have.
All right,
But
so you want to introduce the topic, or you want me
no,
to?
I'm gonna let you introduce it because
All right.
and let me just say this: the reason why it, uh, this is something that you have taught and spoken about so eloquently over the years, and I think that this is something that if people hear what's being said tonight, I think that this is actually going to be life changing for people who hear it. I really do, and so I want to make sure that um, I kind of take myself out of it. Now I will ride along with you and discuss with you, but this is something that you have an anointing
Ah,
to
yeah.
lead.
All right.
So I'm going to yield to your anointing, brother.
All right. So we're going to talk about near-death experiences, NDEs. And I'm certainly not an expert on this. There's lay people that know a lot more about this than I do, I'm sure. But in trying to sort through all of this deconstruction stuff and looking for, I think, at some point I was looking for anchors Like my whole life blew apart. That's why I like the term deconstruction. There's people pushing back on that now, and I know it's become a cottage industry, right?
Yep.
But I really believe I invented that term. I put it out in the universe. I'm just joking, but I deconstructed before I knew anything about anybody else going through that. In fact, I thought I was for sure headed for hell or something, right? Because there was nobody in my sphere at all for about 4 years that I knew that was deconverting. That wasn't even a thing. Like even Christians who left the faith that I knew they themselves considered themselves backslidden, right?
Yep.
And I like the term deconstruction because obviously as a pastor and all of that, I mean, I really went all in. And so it wasn't just like giving up a belief in Santa Claus. I think somebody wrote a book on religious trauma and said, leaving the faith isn't like giving up a belief in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. It's a total dismantling of everything you know about yourself,
Yep.
everything you know about the universe, everything you know about your place in the world. We talk a lot about starting with why, right?
Yep.
And finding your why. And your why, my why was just gone, right? And so I think in going through that, I've studied all kinds of different spiritual paths, all kinds of different stuff. And then I think it was the anti-scientism in 2020 that really was a catalyst for me to say, because you just saw so many people that weren't even open to the science. I mean, in retrospect, we can come back and have the debate, should kids have been wearing masks in school? Maybe that wasn't the best idea. Or, talk about whatever data about, I hate to even say the word because so much of this stuff still gets suppressed in the algorithms, right? But there was just such a disdain for science and the scientific method and that kind of stuff. And then, of course, through our dialogue and stuff, it became evident to me that where you were at in that process, you were very strong on, I want to make sure information is valid by making sure that it's observable, measurable, repeatable. Basically, the scientific method provides a foundation for, I wouldn't say certainty, because I don't think science when it's done right, gets certain, right? But I think people get what I'm saying.
Yep.
So I picked up this book called Dying to Be Me. And I picked it up for the title because what I felt like I lost in the religious world was my authentic self, right? Like it became this sort of cut out version of myself. I've talked about that a lot. And so the title grabbed my attention, right? Because I felt like I was, even though I wasn't dying then, I felt like, I was tearing my life apart because I was trying to reclaim my authentic self. So I'm reading this book, and it's written by a woman who is Indian and Hindu. And any near-death experiences I had ever been exposed to, in Christianity was always talked about in a way to validate the Christian doctrine, right?
Yeah.
People went to hell. What was that book we were talking about it before the show? 20 Minutes in Hell, or whatever the hell it was called.
Yeah.
90 Minutes in Heaven, all this stuff. But it's all framed around support for the Christian doctrines.
Yeah.
And so this was the first NDE experience that I'd even heard about, that this lady was Hindu. She's extremely ill. She dies. She has this incredible NDE, and then comes back from that NDE realizing how loved she is, how valuable she is, and gets freed up as a result of that NDE, gets freed up of all these, and I'm a clinical counselor, right? Yeah. So she gets freed up from all these clinical diagnoses or neuroses that she'd had just from that one experience, right? Like she's not codependent anymore, and she's not neurotic in certain areas anymore, just from that one experience. And that really grabbed my attention. And so from there, already taking more of the scientific lens because of where I was at, and where we were at that time, I was amazed at the scientific research that has been done on near-death experiences that most people don't know about. So, I mean, it's one thing to hear somebody come on a YouTube channel and say, this was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to decide as the listener or the viewer, does that experience, are you telling the truth? Basically, we have to become human lie detectors, right? In that moment, are you telling the truth, or are you just making this up, or, you know, what was going on there? And so it's interesting to me. I think it's the University of Virginia has documented over 2,000 cases scientifically, not just, you know, by word of mouth, about near-death experiences. And then, so I started reading some books about it. There's one that I was looking for it before the show, where what they were examining in the near-death experience arena was not the experience itself, but the change in the people after they have the experience and the longevity of that change. And so their criteria to enter the study was and that's why I was looking for the book. There was a lot of criteria there, but it's very rigorous. Like, you couldn't just claim to have an experience. You had to have been dead for a certain length of time.
Right.
Just your heart stopping didn't count, you know?
Yep.
You had to have all the medical records to validate that. There were several other things about the experience itself that had to qualify it as a near-death that you had to prove in order to qualify as a near-death experiencer. And then they tracked their change of life. In other words, how they showed up in life, how they treated people, how they thought about themselves, the quality of their life, all of that. And the results, I wish I could have found the book because I could give you the actual statistics, but the results were astounding. And so I just started, you know, kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit, like sort of almost more like a hobby, right? Yeah. And so from that, I am absolutely convinced that these experiences are real and that they are not just downloads of DMT in the brain as you're passing out of the body, because that wouldn't explain the drastic life change that people have. Some people develop spiritual gifts out of those experiences, even people that aren't spiritual. Mm-hmm. And then what I want to do, like, as I'm setting this up, before I hand it over to you, is these near-death experiences that have been studied are not necessarily Christian. They don't support. In fact, they contradict the Christian narrative, because here you have a Hindu woman essentially going to heaven, right? No Jesus, no angels, but essentially, you know, a place
paradise.
Of unconditional, paradise. Yeah. And then, you know, so it's been compared cross-culturally, and then it's been compared historically. There are historical accounts, even in ancient literature, of these kinds of events. And so here's what's interesting, because coming from the psychology background, psychology, you know, has been called a pseudoscience. And the reason for that is that we cannot study your consciousness in a laboratory. We depend on your word of mouth, your self-reporting. I've used this example before. If you had a dream last night, we can't take the dream and pull it out and measure it and look at it and study it in a laboratory. We can see correlations or correlatives in terms of rapid eye movement, maybe activity in the brain and stuff. So psychology, if you notice, nobody's talking about, I don't want to say nobody's talking about, if you Google any community counseling center, community mental health center, they're no longer called mental health. They're called behavioral health. Yeah. Because there's been a shift in the in the field, that the only thing that's measurable, quantifiable, that can really be studied is people's behavior. Yeah. Because it can be observed rather than the contents of their own consciousness, right? Yep. And so I think that where this applies to near-death experiences, nobody can repeat a near-death experience. I don't know why you'd want to, right?
Right.
Nobody can take the experience out and examine it and break it down and look at the components of it to understand what it was or how it looks like you could a cell in a petri dish or something.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can compare what we might call anecdotal reports.
Yeah.
Across cultures. You can get sample sizes, and then you can compare it historically. Now you've got a pretty good set of data, right? So if somebody, so all that to say, there are certain features that track in all of these studies, cross-culturally, but also historically. So how could we expect, if it's just cultural conditioning, if it's just the brain, if it's just DMT, then how do you explain the similarities between people across cultures who have totally different symbology, language, cultural conditioning? And then even more so, how do you explain the similarities down through history as well, if that makes sense?
Yep.
So for me, while it doesn't provide absolute proof, it provides enough certainty that I would feel good making an investment, making a bet, giving a verdict in a court of law, that kind of stuff. For me, it's beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yep. And so let me say this to kind of help your position a bit, is I would go from using the word certainty to confidence.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I say that is that even science isn't certain.
Right.
You know, because we have in one of these religious groups, somebody had challenged me. They said, "Well, has any scientists ever observed dark matter?" No, we haven't. But dark matter and dark energy can be mathematically modeled. Now, why is this important? For years, the Higgs boson was mathematically modeled for 30 years before it was actually observed. Mm-hmm. And the observation proved that the mathematical data was sound. So when we have confidence in something, because there's no certainty, there is no certainty, because again, if you go back into quantum physics, Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle. In other words, there is an inherent uncertainty or a probability aspect to the universe.
Right.
But that, all of that being said, let me just say, for the record, and I know I'll probably piss off some of my atheist friends with this, is that I believe that NDEs happen. Mm-hmm. They are bona fide occurrences that are tangible, measurable, and repeatable. Now, here's the thing: people will say about this. Okay, the measurable and repeatable part that people will have issues with. It is measurable because it, like you said, if you take now, and let me just say this, because people say anecdotal data doesn't measure up against empirical data, but I'm going to show you why that's not necessarily true. Because if you have enough anecdote to let me say common anecdotes to provide data points, that those anecdotes can be almost as reliable as any empirical data, because they actually are data points, right? So I think that we have to be careful about this. Now, let me say this, that when you have anecdotal data, and near-death experiences are anecdotal data. Mm-hmm. Now, they're anecdotal data in the sense that not everybody's near-death experience is the same.
Correct.
But you can look for common denominators between. Correct. But the other thing is that we know that everybody dies, And some people survive the dying process. So if they are able to survive the dying process and come back and say, okay, this is what happened. Now let me go down that path for just a second, because the vast majority of NDEs are very similar. They have common aspects, the warmth, the light, the welcoming, the love. People feel that, and it is not respective of culture. It is not respective of spirituality. It's not respect. It doesn't respect anything, because, like you were saying, that a Hindu woman has the same a similar experience to a Christian woman. Now, here's where it goes off the rails, and this is where a lot of the people in the NDE community lose me and people like me, is that they try to brute force assign a spiritual component to this. In other words, that I died, I saw hell.
Right.
I died, I saw Jesus. I died, I saw Moses, right? And all of that is tainted by someone's experience and indoctrination.
Yeah. So I want to speak to that, because our friend Simon Yap, he says here, sorry, excuse me, in the comments, why is NDE experiences are racially limited? A Chinese man sees a Chinese version of hell, a Caucasian person sees a Caucasian version of hell. And that to me kind of speaks, what you were saying kind of segues into that question. But I want to come back to the mathematical modeling first. This is where comparative analysis does give you a mathematical model. So let's just take, so when I was going through my experience with my heart and trying to beat the prognosis, right?
Yeah.
There's something about getting a prognosis from an expert, no matter what it is. It could be investing in the stock market, be your health, when the stakes are high, though, right?
Yep.
It has a real depressing emotional impact. And I do believe, I mean, even regardless of what I believe, we know that there is a placebo effect. If you believe you're going to get better, you have a better chance of getting better. We just know that, right? That's ubiquitous.
Yep.
I don't even know if you could call that a theory, right? Like it's
that's I would say that that's a theory, because it is a hypothesis that has been robustly tested. And
I know, but
we need to do a whole show on that. The difference between a theory and hypothesis.
Yeah. So if I'm sitting there thinking my prognosis is 87% fatality, it's going to be hard to work a placebo effect. So this is where you have science working against itself, right? Like scientifically, we know the placebo effect works. And then on the other side of it, I've got this prognosis. So the way I work this through in my brain, and I think you'll see how this applies to mathematical modeling. If I were to ask anybody out there, did you ever get better from the flu?
Yeah.
Just, you had the flu, you tested positive, you went home, you drank your fluids, you stayed in bed, you took your Advil or whatever, and you got better.
Yeah.
Technically, and I'm being super technical here, and I'm not trying to be a jerk, I'm just trying to illustrate the point. Technically, your healing from the flu is anecdotal, because it's not included in a scientific study.
Right.
So a scientific study has a limited amount of data points, right? So we've studied, and I'm just pulling a number out of the air, 2,000 people that had this strain of influenza. And
if you're not part of the statistical sample, then you're clearly anecdotal.
Right. And so there's a way to model statistics to say, there's a broad enough sample size, there's a diverse enough sample size that this can be extrapolated to the rest of the population, right? But that doesn't mean it's accurate. And even in the studies where, they're saying 87% fatality off of this level of heart failure or whatever, even in those studies, there's the 13% that it didn't apply to.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we need to understand that, these scientific mathematical modelings are very limited.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But also, technically, we can be considered anecdotal. Like, we don't know everybody that had, say, influenza, whatever
Right.
version, whether they lived or died, because some of them didn't even know they had it. They just stayed home and ate chicken noodle soup or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the mathematical modeling comes in with near-death experiences by comparing people that you can validate and verify. I think in that particular study that I was referring to that followed people after their near-death experience, I think one of the criteria was you had to have overheard a conversation, because this is also something that's very common in near-death experiences that could be validated by witnesses. So in other words, person leaves their body and they hear, the doctor's talking, or they hear the doctor in the next room giving the family the report while they experience themselves as in the next room, and it's an accurate report. So there has been some rigorous science done. That's first thing. Second thing that I would say in regards to, I have two thoughts on what Simon's saying, what you're saying about, like I saw hell or the cultural differences. Let me address the I saw hell one first, because in a lot of these scientific studies that they're being driven by real scientists. They're not being driven by, they're being funded by real money to real scientists. Right?
And there's scientific rigor behind it.
Yeah. And so there have been studies that have looked at people who had, pleasant, I guess you could call them, near-death experiences versus visions of hell or whatever. And they found an interesting thing. And this was in the study about following the change of life that people have after a near-death experience. What they found was almost exclusively people who were guilt-ridden, people who were believed in hell and maybe believed they were deserving of hell. Maybe like someone with orange skin and hair that stands up and says, I don't think I'll make it to heaven.
The heat miser. I'm sorry. Well, you said orange hair that stands up. That's the first thing that came to my mind.
This is almost counterintuitive, because if we think it's just a psychological experience, if I believe that if I'm deeply ridden with shame and I believe that I am deserving of hell, then one would think, if it's just being generated by my own consciousness, my own cultural programming, that I would have an experience of hell.
Yeah.
It's not that way. These people, almost all of them, experienced unconditional love. They experienced forgiveness. They experienced what we would call in Christian language, heaven.
Yeah.
The people who experienced hell were the exact opposite. I'm worthy of going to hell. I'm certain about my salvation. I've accepted Jesus Christ. I'm a good person. I know I'm deserving of going to heaven or whatever. So those people were the vast majority of the people who experienced a negative experience when they died, which I found to be incredibly fascinating. The one common component was the people who were blind to their own blind spots, if that even makes sense.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. So keep going.
Had a radical life change because they realized I wasn't who I thought I was. And the people who thought they were deserving of hell had a radical life-changing experience because I'm not who I thought I was. I thought I was this worm, this horrible person, and here I'm receiving all this love and all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I find that interesting. And then before I kick it back to you, do you want to comment on that?
No, go ahead, man.
Just to answer Simon's question about why the cultural differences. Here's my thesis. I won't even call it a hypothesis. I'll just say this is my thesis, my statement of belief, right?
Yep.
My thesis is, in my own experience and study, I think that that consciousness is fundamental to the universe.
Yeah.
And I think that consciousness is also fundamental to human experience.
Yep.
And it's even baked into the scientific method, because the scientific method begins with observable. Well, if there's observation, there has to be an observer to observe.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And so I think consciousness is very malleable, like in a dream world.
Very much.
Right.
Very
We can fly. In a dream world, we can maybe potentially walk through walls. Although I've been lucid dreaming at times and I've tried to fly and I hit my head on the ceiling and landed on the floor. Maybe it's not as bad. That's a true story. Maybe that's not as malleable as I think, but I think it's interactive. So I do think that there are principles, there is territory of unconditional love, compassion, power, freedom, right?
Yep.
These are all kind of at the level of the territory. But at the level of consciousness, there's a map of that territory. So if Jesus, for a person, is the way that they, through their symbolic language, understand unconditional love, and that unconditional love shines through them in consciousness, it will probably show up as Jesus.
Yeah.
If they're Buddhist and their idea of the highest ideal of unconditional love is the Buddha, then it will probably show up as Buddha.
Yeah.
It's the same territory.
Or if you're Hindu, it'll show up as Krishna.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Brahma.
Exactly. So it's the same territory. It's the same principle of unconditional love, freedom, supreme authority, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
But it's coming through a different symbolic map because it's communicating to the person. They're on the receiving end of that.
Yep.
So that's my first part of the thesis. And then the second part of it is this. There's been enough research done on memory. This is going to upset people, but this is scientifically valid. Whether it's true or not, it's scientifically valid.
Yeah.
50%, it's estimated 50% of what you think happened in your life didn't happen at all.
Wow.
Because there are only bits and pieces of information that is stored actually in the brain. And then you have to make sense out of that by filling in the gaps. The same thing happens with people who have ADHD. People who have ADHD can empirically, objectively be shown to be less honest than people who don't have ADHD, or even people who have any kind of neurodiversity going on that affects their attention, right?
Yep.
It's not that they're lying in a moral sense of a lack of integrity or character. It's that they have to fill in the gaps because of the gaps in their own attention. Right. They're only picking up pieces of what's happening. So to create a coherent whole, to create a gestalt, they have to fill in the gaps.
Yep.
So they fill in the gaps with their own understanding of things. So I think it's very possible that a person has an near-death experience and they don't see Jesus, but they experience unconditional love.
Yep.
They experience acceptance, they experience forgiveness, and for them, in their waking life and in their waking consciousness, Jesus represents unconditional love, Jesus represents forgiveness, etc., and so on. Mm-hmm. So what I'm postulating is that they didn't experience a vision of Jesus at all.
Right.
But they couldn't, in order to be able to communicate their memory of the experience, because we have to remember, people are not dictating to us their near-death experiences in real time.
Right.
No, they're not journalists on the scene reporting the latest bomb that went off another part of the world, right, as it's happening, or the storm, or whatever some of these crazy journalists do, right? Saw one the other night, shrapnels falling from the sky, and they got that one on, and I'm just like, you guys are nuts. Like, like, get inside. So this isn't a real-time thing. This is all based on memory. So we have to account for the 50% or whatever that studies show about memory that might be filling in the gaps rather than an actual report of what happened. So what I'm postulating is that they didn't see Jesus at all. They didn't see a Chinese hell at all.
Yeah.
They experienced something that they can only make sense of in their memory by filling in those gaps with Jesus, with angels, with whatever the case may be. And so the report then that comes back is distorted, but that distortion does not make it invalid any more than an eyewitness testimony would be invalidated in a court of law.
Right. and so here's the thing, like everybody has, so when you look at eyewitness testimony, right, we a lot of times in a court of law we rely on that eyewitness testimony. But let's say you have three witnesses observing the same event. So now you have three different perspectives on the same event. Now the event is the event. That's the immutable part of it.
Right.
But the observation of each one, and again, I'm going to get into some quantum physics here, in that observation influences outcome.
Yeah. Right.
So the fact that three different people see it, they see it differently, and that alters the outcome. Now, why is this important? Because, well, let me say this. First of all, when you look at NDEs objectively, let's take the subjective lens off. Let's take off cultural things like Simon had mentioned. Let's take out religious things, what our interpretation of Jesus or Krishna or Buddha is. Let's take away all of these things. And we say that when we study NDEs as a population, as a statistical sample, what we see is that these people have a common experience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with any statistical sampling, you're going to have those things that fall fall within the bell curve,
right,
if you will. And then you're going to have the outliers, right? The outliers. I saw Jesus and he looked like this. I saw hell and it looked like this. I saw heaven and it looked like this. Those are the outliers. And one of the things that we learn about statistics is that you cannot extrapolate any conclusion statistically from outlier data.
Correct. Yeah.
Outlier data lives outside the bell curve.
Yeah. It's usually thrown out.
What's that?
It's usually thrown out. Like they just toss them out. They don't even include it mathematically in their final conclusions.
And so when we look at NDEs, I say, first of all, let's look at the common denominators. And again, we talked about this earlier, and I'm going to speak on it again, is that when you talk about light, when you talk about love, when you talk about acceptance, when you talk about inviting, when you talk about forgiveness, this is a common denominator among all that reside in the bell curve. Okay. Yeah. So if we, and all of this is anecdotal data because it can't be immediately quantified. But what we learn from this anecdotal data is that it lives within the bell curve. It lives within the valid statistical sample.
Yep.
And when you allow for things like standard deviation, and you're looking at median mode and all of that, all of this, it tracks. Mm-hmm. It absolutely tracks. And the other thing too, so like going back to what Simon was saying, Chinese hell versus Caucasian hell, right? That when we look at this anecdotal data, it veers away from what in any outliers. It takes you to the meaty part of the bell curve. And this is and that's why I say, like, okay, tangible, measurable, and repeatable. Okay, not everybody's going to have a near NDE over and over again. So we can't determine repeatability from that, but we can say that this particular experience is a common experience across the populations that we study.
Right.
So it tracks. It's tangible. And so let's talk about this tangibility, right? Because there are certain things that happen in the human body at the time of death. And we've studied this. Is it a perfect study? No. Do we understand this perfectly? No. But we do understand that there are certain hormonal, chemical, and electrical processes that change at the time of death. So we know that these things happen at death. But when we talk about NDEs, right, these same phenomenon happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we know that what is happening is actually representative of a dying experience.
Mm-hmm.
So now we can say, okay, what happened in this particular case? And so you talked about going and studying people after the fact. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the part that religion doesn't like. This is where I'm going to piss off all the religious people. Because when people come back from this, they don't come back with a religious experience. In other words, it's not uniquely Christian. It is not uniquely Buddhist. It is not uniquely Hindu. It doesn't track with any spiritual silos that we've established. That it's something that cuts across all of the silos. And what does that mean? What that means is that the dying experience, how we used to say that God is not a respecter of persons, that death is not a respecter of ideologies, is not a respecter of spirituality.
I like that.
So death doesn't care about your spirituality. Now, let me say this before I kick it back to you. Sure. Is that this little boy that they made this movie like 20 Minutes of Hell or something like that. Yeah. And he went in and he said he saw hell. Okay. If you see hell, it is because you have had some indoctrination to it, that there has been some fear of it established to you. And so when you look at something that is an outlier, that it doesn't fit into the bell curve, it's because it is tainted by your experience, or it's tainted by your indoctrination. And that's the thing, like where we get into things like confirmation bias, mm-hmm. right? Because people want to believe, they want the NDEs to line up with what their spiritual belief is, and what they think. So here's the deal. This is my parting shot, is that if NDEs give an insight into someone's religious belief of what the afterlife would be, then what you would see is statistically is people strengthening in that particular faith perspective. But when you look at NDEs from a clinical or statistical,
that's a good point,
it doesn't hold up. It right. doesn't hold up. The whole heaven and hell paradigm, it doesn't hold up. Well, even the Hindu perspective of reincarnation. And let me say this for the record, that I have a deep respect for the concept of reincarnation, and that's a whole nother thing.
Right.
But even that doesn't hold up.
Right.
When you look at the population of NDE experiences.
Right.
So that's where I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, you got me thinking about reincarnation, so my mind switched tracks. I think so here's the thing. So like, and I saw again, Simon commented, appreciate all the comments, Simon, but he says one of the most frustrating things is that when you try to explain things to people, they will threaten you with hell and just
and justify with NDEs.
with NDEs. And again, those NDEs, much like scripture, are cherry picked.
Yep.
Right. And we don't know what.
But again, let me say this about that. What Simon is saying is that when people talk about these NDEs about hell, right, we're talking about outliers. And that when you look at the statistical sample, I mean, of all the NDEs, if you put all the NDEs and you plot them on the bell curve,
right,
you're going to find these ones that support a Christian narrative, that they're outliers.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was kind of what I was going to say. Like, actually, the best refutation, if they want to go to NDEs, oh man, that's like a 7-course meal. If you want to refute Christianity and hell and stuff like that, because if you really look into it, most of the NDE evidence completely refutes that. Because how do you explain a Hindu woman who worship demons going to a place that's heavenly instead of to a place that's hell?
Right.
Ibn Alexander is a great example. He's another one that I read his books. He was a neurosurgeon atheist who got a severe form of meningitis in the brain, and had this incredible, vivid near-death experience while he was in a coma. Now, did his heart stop beating? No, but he was basically, for all intents and purposes, clinically brain dead. But here's the interesting part. The parts of the brain that are responsible for sensory perception or sensory interpretation, so in other words, not just what your eyes are seeing, but also like dreaming, for example, that I mentioned earlier, they were completely eaten away. They were completely eroded. Those cells were completely dead. So the parts of his brain while he was in a coma that should account for that type of an experience, if it was just a dream or just made up, actually weren't functioning. And there's medical records showing while he was in a coma that those things weren't functioning, right? And he was an atheist, and he has this life-changing, incredible NDE. And so it's actually probably one of the most robust scientific areas outside of creationism that is a refutation to people's beliefs and teachings about heaven and hell and Jesus as Savior and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, aren't you afraid you're going to go to hell because, this Kenneth Hagin went to hell and got saved when he was laying on his bed or whatever, whatever. 22 minutes in hell, whatever. I mean, heard so many of those when I was in the church. Well, okay. Well, then tell me how you explain Ibn Alexander being an atheist going to heaven, or this Hindu woman going to heaven, or so I mean that's just a fool's argument, really, when they say that. Well, aren't you afraid of going to hell? And we know hell's real because so and so went there. It's a straw man argument.
It is. And so I want to talk about this, like, and this is somebody you and I are both pretty familiar with, William Paul Young.
Yep.
The author of The Shack.
Yep.
And his vision of what God is. And I really thought that he that this was almost an ethereal experience that led him to write this, because what he wrote is so counterintuitive to what Christianity portrays.
Yep.
Now, that being said, is that if you read this and you have inculcated this into your belief paradigm, chances are, if you have an NDE, your NDE is going to be influenced and informed and impacted by that belief, that input into your belief paradigm, and that's why, when I look at NDEs, and I admit I haven't studied these, but Chuck Crisco had a really good book about NDEs, and I encourage you, if you go on Amazon, buy his book. I think this will help you. But NDEs that are influenced, informed, or impacted by someone's spiritual paradigm, I immediately, and this is me, your mileage may vary, this is me, that I think that those experiences can be regarded as outliers and disregarded. But when you talked earlier about a Hindu woman who had an NDE and her experience fell into the bell curve of what we'd expect an NDE to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, is like when I see NDEs and the vast majority. If you go in and I mean if you dedicate, and I haven't, but when we said this is what we're going to do as a show, I did some research going into the show,
of course,
and that when you look at NDEs, by and large, they reflect something common that doesn't adhere to any particular spiritual paradigm.
mm-hmm.
In other words, it's light, it's love, it's embrace, it's forgiveness, it's all of these things. And I really think this is and this is me, this is where I am spiritually, that I think that tracks with what the universe is, or consciousness is, or if you want to dovetail the two of those things into something that we could call God,
Mm-hmm.
that this all tracks with that. And again, when you look at unresolved, unforgiven, unsettled, all of these things that say, okay, I'm not worthy. I'm only worthy of the hell that God created, blah, blah, blah. These are the outliers. And you cannot create a definitive analysis of anything that's based on outliers. And I want to say this, like Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, and I highly recommend that you read this, because here's the thing: Gladwell said that there is validity in studying the outlier, but and I will agree with him to a point on that, but I don't think that you can use outliers to draw conclusions, because they are outside of the statistical norm. They are outside of the median. They are outside of the mode. They're outside the bell curve. And so you can't logically draw a conclusion based on these. Now you could say, okay, if let me walk this back for a second, because if you go back to the outliers and you can derive some sort of pattern from that, at that point they cease to become outliers, and they then become an outer interpretation of what's in the bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that we have to be careful of, is that okay, we might have defined the bell curve as this, but there might be something above that we missed. And I'm okay with that, because that just simply says that our science has to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. I would still come back to our memory is constructed. It's not a record. I love vinyl, right?
Yeah, me too.
I get frustrated. I was listening to some music.
Simon is a big connoisseur of vinyl, by the way.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was getting frustrated with Spotify this week, because I have to listen to it. Like, we just don't have stereo system. Well, maybe you do, but I don't have a stereo system like I did as a kid, right? Like,
yeah.
The quality, and it's, I think it's pretty well known fact that MP3s or whatever they are now, whatever iteration of them they are now, don't have the same quality.
They lose the warmth. They lose the dimensional capacity of analog recording.
Yeah, exactly. So all memory is not a record that we can just put on and it's going to sound exactly like the studio production or whatever. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And the other interesting thing about memory is you don't remember the actual event. You remember the event the way you told it the last time. This is why, tails grow taller on down the line, as they say.
Yeah.
That's actually neuroscience. So it's almost like you could explain it this way. It's almost like you retrieve bits and pieces of a memory in a story, and then as you're telling the story, you're altering the record. You're actually altering the record while you're telling it to the other person.
Yep.
And then what you're storing is the altered record, not the actual record. That's scary for people because, we'll fight, we'll argue. You said this. No, I didn't. I said this. I love those State Farm commercials or whatever in football games where they throw the yellow flag and they can come back and do the instant replay, right?
Yeah, I love those. Yeah.
Our brains just aren't like that. And so people are going to distort, especially, now here's the thing, especially if they have no category to put what you're talking about in. So I'm sure we've all experienced this where you're talking to somebody and they just look at you like you grew 3 heads or like, you just know they're not getting it,
Yep.
And it's frustrating because it's like, how can you not see this? Well, there's no landing strip in there. Like you can only receive new information based on information that you already have that gets integrated into it. So if I don't have a category, a pre-existing category for what you're telling me about, I have no place to put that in my brain whatsoever. None.
Right.
No place. So it's fascinating. So I'm just going to do a little bit of neuroscience here because I think it's important. I think because what we're getting again is the report of the experience, not the experience itself. Right.
Yeah.
So if I were to ask you or anybody out there, what did you have for dinner on March 3rd, 2019?
Can't tell you.
Unless that was an important date or an important year. If it was an anniversary and you were in Mexico.
I mean, even if you ascribe an important date to it, I'll bet you they still can't figure that out.
What shirt did you wear 45 days ago? So most of life is mundane, right? So the way that the brain works is you're being bombarded with all these mundane activities. And again, to use a metaphor, it's like, and I'm old, right? So I'm going to use one that I can relate to and probably nobody born in this millennium can relate to. But let's say you got a bunch of faxes coming in, right?
Yeah.
And you got a guy back there and he's looking at all these faxes and he doesn't know what to do with them. And so anything mundane that comes in, it goes in the shredder. Shred. It immediately goes into the shredder. That's why you walk into a room and you can't remember why you walked into the room. Right?
Yep.
Now, if it has emotional significance, then the guy in in this metaphor, your brain will look at that and say, okay, this is important. This is important information. We need to pay attention to this. And it will say, where does this go based on our current filing cabinet?
Yep.
So if, let's say, March 3rd, 2019 was your 50th wedding anniversary, and you remember that you took your wife to, I don't know, the Ritz-Carlton or something, you ate in their restaurant, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that goes in the category of anniversary memories, right? This is why trauma is so tough, because what happens in trauma is that you have an experience that is so shocking and so difficult to deal with that your brain doesn't know. It knows it's significant. It can't put it in the shredder.
Yep.
It doesn't know what to do with it, so it stays on the desktop, which is why you have flashbacks. It's why you dream about it, because the brain doesn't know where to file it.
And it displaces other memories.
Right. So bring this to near-death experiences, we're talking about something that you have no real category for. We're talking about an experience, and you come back in your body, your consciousness is bringing this, and it's like, oh my God, I had this amazing experience. And the brain does its job, right? It's going to do its work. Well, shit, we can't shred this, except in one exception I'll get to in a minute. But this was death. What do we believe about death? We believe Jesus, hell, whatever. Okay, this goes in our religious category. All right. And then 20 minutes later, an hour later, whatever it is, somebody asks you, what did you experience or whatever? You go into the category. Now you're pulling it out of the religious category. So now it's going to have all the religious distortions in it.
Yeah.
That's just neuroscience. We do that with everything, not just near-death experiences. We do that with everything. Yeah. So if you don't have a category, and this is why I think, you, me, people like Simon, other people, it's like I try to share these things with people and they just look at me like, you're crazy. It's because you're introducing a concept that is so new and so radical to people that have never given it a single thought a day in their life. They literally don't have a runway, if you will. If you want to look at neural pathways as runways, they don't have a runway for that plane to land.
Wow.
So people say, well, what about all these people? Only like 18% or something of people that have died and been revived have had near-death experiences. That may or may not be true. What we can know for sure is that only 18% remember the experience. I woke up last night. Something woke me up. I was dreaming. I knew I was dreaming. And something woke me up suddenly, a noise or something with the dogs or something. I woke up suddenly, and I've been for the last 2 years religiously, if I can use that term, meticulously recording my dreams and working with them as part of my own path and personal growth. And so my habit is, if I wake up, oh, that dream was important, and I'll start writing it down immediately. And so I knew I was dreaming. I knew I woke up, and my instant reaction was, I got to write down that dream. Yeah. And Derrick, I couldn't retrieve an image, a concept, a feeling. I couldn't retrieve anything. So people will say, I never dream, or I didn't dream last night. But your Apple Watch shows that you spent a significant amount of time in REM sleep. Well, we know that REM sleep correlates directly to dreaming, and that people dream when they're in REM sleep. So you dream every night. The problem is you don't remember the dream.
Right.
So it doesn't mean you didn't dream. It means you didn't store that. In the shredder immediately. Shred. So I think it's not only possible, but incredibly probable that most people have these experiences, and they are so far out of this world and anything that they know that they don't have a category in their brain, in the physical material stuff, in which to store that memory when they come back. I knew I dreamt because I woke up immediately from it. But there have been other nights where I woke up and I was just dead asleep. I didn't dream or nothing. Yeah, I did dream. I just don't remember that I dreamt. And so you can't say, well, these people did not have near-death experiences when they died. What you can say accurately, they don't remember if they did.
Yep.
And that's a different conversation altogether. So
that's what I had this. I was telling Maya about a dream that I had this week where I was like in a dark tunnel, and all of a sudden I saw this iridescent, brilliant blue, like cobalt or indigo. But it was the most brilliant blue I had ever seen in my life. Now, what happened was that I tried to interact with this blue, and it stopped. And so it was just darkness. So here's the thing. I knew that I was dreaming. I was consciously aware that I was dreaming. So I said, okay, I'm dreaming. This is my dream. I can just reconstruct the blue. I could not. I couldn't. And so what happens, what I say this in the context of NDEs, that if I have an NDE and I say, okay, I know that I experienced something, but now I'm trying to recreate it in my conscious mind,
Right.
but I can't.
Right.
I can't. And I think that that's the case with a lot of people that experience NDEs. And so what happens is, the God of the gaps kicks in.
Yeah.
I need,
No,
I
exactly.
need, I need to put something in here
Right.
that makes this make sense.
Right.
And that's where I think, you know, where I think religion taints the the process of dying.
Ooh.
Because here's the thing, we all are going to die.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is that with NDEs, some of us get close. We get close enough to taste it, but we don't actually experience it because we don't cross over to the other side.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we get close enough to see it. And so immediately what the human mind tries to do is it tries to quantify or make sense of what did I just see.
Right.
So now we're in this space where, okay, I'm trying to make sense of this, but just like my experience with the iridescent blue, I could not recreate it.
Exactly.
So what happens is that I come out of this situation, I know that I went through something, but I can't recreate it. I can't tell it like it is. And I'll share one more experience with you that I had, and this was not an NDE, not an NDE at all, but there's a television network called Sprouts. It's a offshoot of PBS, and I used to faithfully watch this with my kids. Now,
Mm.
a funny thing about me is that I like to sleep with the TV on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll set it on something that like I'll put it on reruns of the Outer Limits, and I'll watch that, and it just runs while I sleep, and that
Mm-hmm.
influences, informs, and impacts my dreams. But because I was watching Sprouts with my kids, there was this one show that came on like at 2 in the morning called Biblos. Biblos.
Okay.
And it's weird because you have these globular creatures of different colors living in this crazy world, and they don't even speak English. It's just like boo, 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 boo. And so I had this dream, and I'll never forget this dream. Is we were living in Arkansas at the time, but I had a dream that I experienced death. And what happened was I went through something that felt in my mind like a birth canal, that I was being squeezed through. And when I came out, I was like Biblos.
Mm.
I was this globular creature living in this strange world. And I said, okay, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would the afterlife be something that I could really understand with my finite mind? And so I was like, okay, from a NDE standpoint, this made perfect sense to me. Now I'm not saying that's the way it is or that's the way it should be. I'm just saying that I had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the universe trying to tell me what death looked like.
Mm.
And so I say all this to say that, again, when you look at most NDEs, they track with a certain experience. If you say that there's an experience level, they track with
Yep.
this experience level.
Yep.
Now, does Does this mean that's what it is? That's the be all to end all? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that when we look at when we try to make something tangible, measurable, and repeatable out of this, that this is something that it tracks. It tracks. And so what I want, and this is like my parting shot, if
Yeah.
you will,
Yeah.
that I believe that NDEs are real. I believe that the dying process causes the human body, the human brain, to release endorphins and other chemicals that prepare the consciousness for the transition from the three-dimensional reality that we understand to whatever it is on the other side.
Mhm.
And so I think that periodically that there are people that make it through the early prep phase but don't complete it. And so they're able to come back and say, okay, this is what I saw. And again, most people that have the NDE, they have an experience that is similar.
Mm-hmm.
They have a almost, I want to say almost a universal experience.
Yeah.
A UX. That they have a universal experience. But when you have people that say, oh, I saw Jesus, or I saw hell, or I saw heaven, or I saw, a lot of that is colored by what your perspective is and what you've been inculcated with. And I don't think, for everybody that's listening, I don't think that that's trustworthy information.
Yeah.
So when I say, okay, I look at near death experiences and I say, okay, what is this saying? And I look at the people that have been through it, and the people that their experiences track with common experiences from the past, then I say, okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That works with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk away from their experience, my understanding of their experience, with peace.
So I think my parting shot would be this. This gets into a whole other area, but I'm trying to think how to language it, because if I say Hermetic tradition, that's not quite accurate. I want to say almost Western tradition,
Yep.
beginning with Egypt and including Egypt as part of the West. That's how,
Sure.
that's how we do it. So if you go back, I mean, the Egyptians were really, we blame a lot of shit on Christianity that really is thinking that came from Egyptian sources and thinking that came from Greek sources and Platonic sources and stuff like that. And so a lot of stuff that the church gets blamed for were philosophies that were already there, right?
Right.
But I mean, the existence of, the soul after death, life after death, that the oldest version of that seems to come from Egypt, right?
Yep.
And then you can trace, people's thoughts about this down through Western history prior to like this Christianity that we have today. And the point I'm making is that they viewed philosophically, mystically, from an occult perspective, however you want to, whatever language you want to use, they viewed death as a journey, not a destination. So right. Christianity teaches us that we die and we instantly go to heaven, or we instantly go to hell, or we instantly stand before the judgment seat of Christ, or whatever, right? Yeah. It's instantaneous, but that's not the perennial wisdom. That's not what humanities believe. It's a journey. So if we think about it as a journey of consciousness, of disincarnate, disembodied consciousness, mm-hmm. A person who's having a near-death experience, not necessarily arriving at the destination, they're just arriving at the bus station, if I can say it that way. Does that make sense? They're
They're,
getting on.
they're not in the pool. They're just on the diving board.
Yeah. And
That's good.
so I think there are phases. And so I think if we look at this process of passing on as a transitioning, whatever you want to call it, as a journey, then I think it explains a lot. I think that would explain, earthbound spirits.
Mm.
They got stuck here for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
They didn't make it to the bus station, if that makes sense.
Right.
I died and I saw Jesus. Okay, well, because you're just coming out of your body, your earthly, culturally conditioned consciousness is still intact, right? So
Yeah.
the way the ancients looked at this was that, the physical body was the first thing to die. And then in some traditions, you had 7 levels of energetic bodies.
Mm.
And part of that energetic body carries the imprint of what you experienced. And so for people who go to hell, maybe they had a belief in hell just living in Western culture or whatever. That could just be shedding that aspect of consciousness as you're on this journey to wherever you're going to end up, whether it's reincarnating or whether it's eternity someplace, whatever it is, right? So I think it can explain earthbound spirits. I think it can explain poltergeists. I think it can explain near-death experiences, why people see what they see. Doesn't mean that's their final destination. And so I think that there is a gradual, this is just my personal belief, I think there is a gradual shedding of that earthly identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not binary in the sense that it's either or, now and then, like on and off.
Yeah.
It's a process. And so I do think that whatever because I'm referring to a comment I saw somebody made, I think it was Michelle Pfeiffer or something. Yeah, she says, I don't worry about hell. People already live there now in their daily life. Well, Christianity teaches if you just believe in Jesus, as soon as you die, it's the magic pill, right? It's the magic carpet ride. And you don't have to work through whatever your issues were.
It's the get out of hell free card.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not just that. It's like instant, or let's take Islam, instant harem or whatever.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
70 versions.
Yeah. It's not just get out of hell, but it's like I'm instantly changed. I'm instantly perfect. I don't think that's the case. I think that the work that we do here matters. I think that the work that we do on ourselves matters. I think that our personal growth matters. And I think that we leave this life at whatever level we're at, we still have to continue on that journey of evolving as a soul.
Yeah.
And so if you have, well, anyway, I'm just going to leave it at that because I think that's a good place to land the plane.
Well, no, that's actually a good place to end. But like my thing is that what my challenge to anybody that's listening to this is go past your beliefs.
Yeah.
Go, take your beliefs and if studying something in Islam causes you to go past your beliefs, great. If it's Hindu, if it's Buddhist, if it's Zoroastrian, if it's Kemetic, whatever it is, if it takes you past your beliefs, great. Because at the end of the day, your beliefs are not what is going to dictate, and this is hard, your beliefs are not what's going to dictate your afterlife.
I think that's really important. I'm glad you said that.
Afterlife will happen irrespective of your beliefs.
Yeah, I think that encapsulates everything that we're saying, and I think that really needed to be said. I think that was really important. I'm glad you said that.
So that's where I am, man.
All right, so this is a good show. We got a lot of engagement. And
yeah, a lot of people were talking. Lindsay Miles came on, said this is good stuff. Daniel Rose said the mind projects its concepts. Michelle Pfeiffer said, I don't worry about hell. people already live there now in their daily life. I mean, all kinds of good comments. And, Simon, of course, Simon, man, Simon is one of my heroes, man.
Mm-hmm.
He is, I don't know if you've seen any of Simon's recent stuff, but Simon
I'm
used to be,
Facebook a lot, and he doesn't hit my algorithm for whatever.
yeah,
I'd have to go look him up for some reason. Sorry, Simon.
no, he is like, he was a mighty Christian preacher like we were, and he was a strong proponent of the grace movement like we were. But then Simon ventured into what they call preterism, and it caused me to see some things differently. But now Simon is like, okay, this is all one big fairy tale. And let me say this. Let me say this about this. I want to say this to my Christian brothers and sisters. I'm not asking you to believe what I believe. That's not my ask. My only ask is that you question what it is that you've been told.
Mm-hmm.
And question it with intellectual honesty. And if you do, there are going to be some things that are going to challenge you. And when they challenge you, it's just like anything else, that if something challenges you, you have to weigh that evidence with the evidence of what you already know. And let what is true rule.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, to use your Bible, let God be true and every man a liar.
Yeah.
And that's what I'll say. But like when it comes to these NDEs and experiences of what a prelude to death might look like, if you look at this from an empirical standpoint and you look for the common denominator, all of these things look pretty similar. And that makes sense because we are all human, and that is our common denominator.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Appreciate it.
Yep.
You came up with the idea for the topic. I that wasn't even anywhere on my radar, but man, it was good. I enjoyed getting back into this.
Well, the only reason why I thought of it, Aaron, is that I know that this is something that you are very passionate about.
Yeah.
That is something that you've taught about, and I believe that I was right.
You know what would be an interesting follow-up? We can talk about it, but it'd be interesting. People comment, especially with the state of the world.
Yeah.
If this reality that people encounter in NDEs is unconditional love, is all this stuff, light, whatever. And I think it's base reality. I don't think this is base reality. I think that is base reality. That's my personal conviction. Whatever we enter into. But it begs the question, it would be interesting to explore. It'd be difficult to explore. What the fuck is this construct that we're living in? And then from there, going into the problem of evil.
Yeah.
Like, especially now, because I think, people are like, with all the stuff that's coming out and all the stuff that's happening in the world, like, what is, if that's base reality, then what the hell is this? What is this construct that we're living in? I think that would be an interesting topic to explore.
I think it absolutely is. And I mean, like there are some people that say, hey, this is the matrix. We're all plugged in and oblivious to what's really going on. And then there are some that say, okay, that there's a great awakening going on, and we're beginning to see evil unmasked. And I get that too. I mean, there are so many ways of splitting that hair.
Yeah, there is. I do think this is a biologically simulated reality. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
People get into simulation theory, they're going into like advanced societies that created this, like almost like 13th Floor. I don't know if you remember that movie or if you ever saw 13th Floor, almost like that kind of stuff. I think it's a biologically based simulated reality. I really do believe that. And I believe that we are more like avatars,
Mm-hmm.
or not avatar. What's the right word here? If I'm playing a video game and I'm moving my guy around and stuff,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
that
an
is,
avatar.
whatever that on the screen is. Yeah. I do think that's the structure of this reality, but it begs a lot of questions like, what the fuck? Why the fuck? Like, what the hell?
So like, and this is something, you and I have talked about this, and this is something that's talked about in spiritual circles, that this we are the global consciousness experiencing something in 3 dimension.
I do think that, I think, well, anyway, we're getting into another topic, but I do think it can be manipulated.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
but
think that's what manifestation is. I think
that begs the question: who's doing the manipulating?
no, I think we can manipulate it. I think we can, like in the sense of manifestation, like I think we can change our reality on levels that we haven't even conceived of.
Yeah,
because it's a simulation and we're participating in it.
yeah.
I don't think it's nearly as cause and effect fixed and concrete as we've been led to believe. But like I said, that might be follow up. So let us know if you want to explore those topics with us, or I don't know, maybe those are potatoes too hot to touch. I don't know.
No, and while we're here, that if there is any topic that you'd like to see Aaron and I discuss over the course of alcohol,
yeah, right, yeah,
we would love to talk about it. So,
all right, everybody, thank you for joining us. Derrick, thank you, man. I enjoyed this. I'm sorry I've been unavailable. You know why?
No, dude, I did a show last week, and I deliberately did it outside of our normal show window so that it's not, confused. But I definitely earnestly solicited prayer, for you.
I heard that. I appreciate that.
But dude, it's like, I'm glad you're back. It's good to see you. Good to talk to you. And as always, this has been the high point of my week.
Yeah, me too, man. So, hey, thank you that was thoughtful, like, hey, I'm going to do this at a different time. And you had texted me, and you told me about the topic, and I don't even think I replied. And it's simply because, and with everything I've been through, I didn't have the bandwidth. I hadn't even paid attention. I hadn't even paid attention. I was like, what? Wait, what? There's a war? Wait, what? That's how hyper focused I have been on my own personal problems and crises the last month.
Yep.
I mean, that's I'm not even exaggerating.
No, it's okay, man. You're back, and we missed you.
Yeah, it's good to be back. All right. Peace and hair grease.
Adios, y'all. Hey, I don't know how you did that, man. Yeah, the confetti.
That was what it is?
I don't know. You said
I've noticed like on a Sunday, all of a sudden this thumb will pop up. I thought you did the confetti.
No. That showed up on your screen. It was like, woo.
I thought you did that. I was going to ask you how you did it. So Sunday I was doing this live, and this thumb pops up, right? Nice. But I had given a thumbs up to the camera, and so see there.
There it goes.
So we need to dig into this and see. Let's see if I can make the confetti. Peace and hair grease.
There you go.
It's saying the magic words. Holy shit.
That is so cool, man.
See, we're manipulating reality.
You're manifesting, man. You're manifesting.
Peace and hair grease.
All right. Love y'all.